So, welcome to this podcast. If you're listening as a podcast or if you're watching it on the YouTube channel, we're glad to have you with me. Today, I have with me Cheryl Johnson. She is a performance solution specialist. She has more than 20 years of experience in teaching, coaching, learning design and development, and technology support for learning. So, Cheryl, give us a little more about your background and your history and how you came to be where you are today.
Oh, started probably 20, actually date myself here, 30 years ago as an instructional designer, just writing training for people with disabilities. I know you do a podcast on travel and accessibility. So I worked in the accessibility arena for a long time. And that's really where I got my start with technology and learning and technology and how they kind of mesh together. And as I started applying for jobs and working in the contract arena, I interviewed for lots and lots of jobs. And as a contractor, you tend to get a lot of jobs. And I kept finding that people were hiring me to write instructions, which would make sense. I'm an instructional designer. But that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to train people to perform better at work and not just be able to do their jobs using a tutorial or, a set of instructions, but actually motivate and inspire them to perform at higher levels, both mostly at work, but also in their own personal lives. I do some other things on the side in terms of I work with some people who have mental health issues, and I work and coach and mentor students and things like that. So my goal has always been performance. So that's where I changed my title from an instructional designer to a performance solution specialist, because I wanted to attract more clients who were focused on improving performance.
Okay, well, very nice. Lots of experience. So tell me about the Ambition Quotient.
It's really, it's a very short book and it's very practical with lots of stories and case study type experiences in there. And it's really meant somewhat as a calling card. It's not a really deep, long book, with lots of, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's really simple. And I kept it really simple for a purpose. I wanted for people to understand that the trick to motivating people is not, there's no secret sauce, there's no great words of wisdom that I have that people don't probably already know, but for some reason they don't get applied in the workplace. And so we oftentimes think about people with an IQ, a really good, high IQ, and they're really smart. And we think, wow, that'd be a great employee to have because they're really smart. Well, really smart people are good at fulfilling tasks and doing their job. And then there's, we've heard of EQ, emotional intelligence. People are really good at communicating, they have empathy, all those kind of things. And they're all important. IQ is important, EQ is important. But if people aren't motivated, if they aren't inspired and excited to get up and go to work every day, doesn't matter how smart you are or how emotionally intelligent you are, you're probably not going to have a lot of success at work if you don't have that high level of motivation.
Okay, and so how did you arrive at that concept of Ambition Quotient?
This is interesting. When I first came up with it, I was working with a marketing, I've been working with sales and marketing people for quite a while, writing some training and things. And they were the ones that, presented the idea to me. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. I like that. But then I can't remember who it was at one point was like, ooh, ambition seems like kind of a negative thing. And I was like, negative? I never thought of ambition as a negative thing. But I think sometimes in the workplace, it is looked at as a negative thing, because if you're ambitious, you're kind of climbing the ladder of success and at the expense of others. And that's not at all what this is about. This isn't about just think about me and how I can get where I want to go in life. It's really about working with people so that we can all get where we want to go. So as I thought about, what is kind of the missing, that's why I call it the missing quotient, is because I have kids. They're really smart, but they really struggle sometimes at work. And I have 4 kids. A couple of them are really good at the, emotional intelligence side of things, but they struggle at work and they're just not excited to go to work. They're like, my daughter, for example, she started working for a insurance company, a large insurance company. And when they first started, brought her on board, and I found this to be really true too, a lot of the jobs that I did, was they sit you in front of a computer You can't log in. You don't have any of your credentials. You sit there for a whole week. And if you can't log into your computer, you can't do any work. So you bring a book and you read a book or whatever you do, in the interim. And they train you, but they don't really train you to do your job. They just give you information. They don't really give you practical application of that information. And so she's really struggling. She's a really smart girl, had the emotional intelligence side of things, but she just was like, Mom, I hate this job. I don't like this job. I don't want to go to work every day. And it was just simply because, and she would volunteer. She'd be like, hey, give me, I see there's an opportunity to do some work here. Nobody's doing it. Can I do it? Oh, no, you're too new. You can't do that, kind of thing. And so she just got really frustrated. And, after even 2 to 3 months, even after she got trained, got her login credentials, she was just so frustrated by the time she reached that point because she didn't feel like she was making any meaningful contribution. And that is really key to motivation, is making sure that people feel like they're contributing, like what they're doing is providing value to the organization.
Yeah, I can see that. I have been in organizations that would suck the ambition out of everybody. Again, you just didn't want, the only reason you went there was you had to get a paycheck to feed the family, but you just didn't want to be a part of it. And so that's an important piece of what makes people succeed. And it's interesting because I teach a training class for managers. And one of the things that I encourage them to do is to talk to their employees, their team, and build them in them the sense that their area of responsibility, typically it's technicians and they have an assigned territory. I said, teach them to think about that like it's their own business.
Yes.
Like it's their customers, their money, their business, and then empower them to make decisions. They're going to make bad decisions, teach them how to make better ones, but just make them think that that's their business and act like it's their business. Because I think when you start to take ownership of something, that you start to, I think it would improve your ambition level.
It is. It's interesting because you bring up a very valid point there. We don't want people to fail. So often we don't allow our employees to do things because we're so worried about them making mistakes and failing. And that's where I kind of got into the coaching side of things. And I think another key element within an organization is I actually started work as a W-2 employee, which is unusual for me, but I really liked this organization. They convinced me to come on board. And the first thing they did was pair me with a mentor. And I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. Why would I need a mentor? Well, because I didn't know the lay of the land. I didn't know how they did things at this organization. I didn't know where to go to get information. So many things. And I was like, wow, this is probably one of the most valuable tools I've ever had, is just this mentor, somebody who could, show me how to navigate the system. And just those little things like, oh, if you work with this department, this is the way you kind of get what you need from them. If you work with this department, this is how you work with them and how you interact with them so that you can be successful. I can't remember. I don't want to say which organization it was, but it was a very large Silicon Valley tech organization, but I just can't remember exactly. So I don't want to quote without saying it, but they actually had a group that they called, it was a failure organization. It was where people went to try new ideas without fear of failing, so that they could try things and try things and try things and experiment. And that's where their innovation was driven from. It was driven from a point where we allowed people to fail. And if you have a good system in your organization of coaching, you can help people when they make mistakes, and the smaller mistakes especially, to overcome those, learn from them, and move forward in a positive way. And when people feel like they're not so paralyzed by fear of failure, that they're willing to try because they know that a mistake isn't going to be looked at as, oh, I'm going to get fired, as opposed to, oh, okay, I made a mistake here. I feel comfortable going to my supervisor, my coach, or whoever, and having them help me work through that so that I can move forward and help move the organization forward based on what I've learned. So I've often said that, failure is not an option. It's actually required in the world we live in to be able to move forward. And, if we're not afraid of failing, then we're much more willing to try new things. Especially, I look at the world we live in, especially since COVID and the pandemic and everything. People have to do things differently. Everything's got to be done differently. And if you're not able to, try new things and move out there, and then your organization doesn't survive.
I agree 100%. In fact, it's interesting. I talk in the industry quite a bit about the fact that too many times their business is stuck in a model. And, and I use the analogy of a rut, once you get into a rut, it's just easier to stay in the rut to drive, especially, I lived in Wisconsin for a while in the wintertime, and on the road when there was a lot of snow, there were ruts, and you just stayed in the ruts because it was hard to get out of them. The challenge is, and this is where I go with this analogy, is that if you dig a rut deep enough and close in both ends, you have a grave. And I see that happen to businesses. I go back to an example in a related industry, is a typewriter business. You had all these dealers in the late 80s, that were in the typewriter business, and it was a great business to be in. And they missed a few little things happening around them, like Hewlett Packard and Wang and the IBM PC. And all of a sudden, nobody wanted a typewriter because they all had laser jets and, PCs. It happens with individuals within an organization. It happens outside. I like the comment you made about there's so much fear of failure and fear of letting your employees fail inside organizations. And like I said, it just stifles the creativity. You think about a little child learning to walk. They're not afraid of falling. They just get up and try again and pretty soon they can walk. And we need to be in an organization where we want to make sure that somebody's failure is not going to destroy the company.
Right.
But I do think that we need to give them the latitude to make decisions and to try to be able to experiment a little and try to improve things. I know my last couple of jobs I went in and I saw some things that needed improvement, and I started talking to people about it, and oh no, we can't change.
Yeah.
Not a good reason.
Yeah, it's funny because you bring up that analogy, and just made me think. My grandson he was living with us for a while, and he and his mom were living with us. And honestly, most kids are not afraid of falling down or failing. I mean, that's just, they spend the majority of their life, that's what they do. And that's how they learn and move forward. But my 2-year-old grandson, my husband was kicking the soccer ball around with him down in the basement, and every time he'd go to kick the ball, he'd miss the ball and he'd fall down. And after 1 or 2 times of that, he just wouldn't do it anymore. He's like, he just would cry, "Don't make me do that." That's like, kind of thing. And we thought, this is weird. Most kids aren't normally, afraid of that kind of thing. And so we thought about it for a while. Finally, my husband was like, okay. He went and he, kicked the ball and pretended like he missed. He really did miss, but, obviously he knew how to kick the ball. But then he'd fall down. And after a few times, my grandson was like, "Oh, you fall down, you missed the ball." And then he was willing to try again. And I think that that's another really good analogy for the workplace. When you see that other people fail and that they're willing to, and that the organization isn't going to punish them or fire them or whatever, they're willing to make mistakes, they're willing to fall, then I'm willing to, kind of follow suit. And I think as management and leadership, maybe that's something that we always go to try to cover up our mistakes and hide our mistakes so nobody can see them. Why not just say, "Hey, I made a mistake. Here's what I learned, and I don't want the rest of you to make the same mistake. So why don't we share it?" That company actually had what they called a failure board, where they shared those kind of examples where people would just say, "This is what I learned,"
Yeah, and exactly. As long as you learn from failure, it's not a failure. Somebody asked Thomas Edison how he failed about, failing 10,000 times, I think it was, to create the light bulb. He says, "I didn't fail 10,000 times. I learned 10,000 things that didn't work."
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'll use one more saying that I heard that I like as well. And this guy was talking about, it was in the social media market and trying to get started. He said, "You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail in the process." He said, "As long as you learn from it, you just fail forward. And if you want to go faster, fail forward faster, and just accelerate the pace of learning." And that's what it's all about, is learning.
Yeah.
So I noticed on your website, let me click over there for just a second so I can see it. It says you have a smart learning for business success. So tell me about that a little bit.
When I go to work with organizations, they want to know, what process do I use when I work with organizations to build training programs so that, we make sure that what we're building is actually meaningful and that it actually yields the kind of results that they're looking for. And it's funny. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell you I'm not exaggerating when I say I've worked for probably at least 50 to 60 different organizations. Some of them, a month or two, some of them 4 or 5 years. But when I come in, they'll sit me down at a computer and they'll say, okay, we need this training. It needs to be 30 minutes long. It needs to be built in this platform. And it needs to be on this topic. Okay, how did you decide it needs to be 30 minutes? Well, that's all the time we have. Okay. How did you decide, that this was the topic you wanted to, well, it's a compliance topic. We need to make sure that we have training for this compliance topic, harassment prevention or whatever, to make sure we don't get sued. Okay. So are you having a problem with harassment, or is this just to check the box so that legally you're covered? And it does make a difference. There's that question, oddly enough, a lot of people think, oh, there's a right or wrong answer there. There really isn't a right or wrong answer there. And I'll give an example. I actually worked for an organization, and I'll be very discreet here. They have people that work out in the field and they have people that work in the office. And the people that work in the field are generally males, and the people that work in the office are generally females. And when these males would come into the office for whatever reason, they would, like, oh, hi, honey, how you doing today? Or, oh, I really like that dress. I think it's pretty, kind of things. And they thought they were being friendly. They really did honestly believe they were being friendly, where the women saw it as, ooh, those are sexist things to say. You shouldn't be saying those kind of things in the workplace, kind of thing. And so, when this organization hired me to come in and work with them, there was a problem, and they hired me because there was a problem. Whereas the majority of the time, people hire me because they need to check a box. So if there's a real problem there, we're going to take a totally different approach than if it's just kind of a check the box kind of thing. And, you can't say that I'm going to have a 30-minute, lesson on harassment prevention, if I've got a real problem. We've got to dig a lot deeper. We've got to go to a lot of different levels to figure out what's going on, what's the best way to approach it, so that, the men that came into the office aren't being insulted and the women feel comfortable, in the workplace. So, there's two sides to every story there. And that's where, when I sit down with organizations, I really try to get them to sit down and figure out exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And they don't usually want to do that. And then, of course, on the other end, it's like, we want to measure how successful we were. Well, if you want to measure how successful your training program is, you have to define what it is you're trying to train, build up front, so that on the other end, you can measure it. You can't measure something if you don't define it up front. And so this smart learning for business success kind of came out of the idea that if people could see the process that we go through to help them build training, they might better understand when they engaged with us what they were getting.
Oh, so it's kind of for customer education, that would be it. And that's a good idea. Some of the things that I do wind up very much being customer education before they're customers. I guess you could say prospect education.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting because in the space I come from, technical training is a constant, unending process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really amazing how often it devolves into death by PowerPoint.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. I literally was sitting in a class at one of the manufacturers I worked for, and I had one of my coworkers sitting next to me. And about 5 minutes into the class, I handed him a note and I said, please kill me now.
Yes.
This is 5 minutes into a 5-day class.
Yeah.
I wanted to die to make the pain stop.
Yes.
But there's a lot to be said for the way things are designed. Okay, so do you work with companies other than in the sense of you go in and design content for them, or what else do you do to help companies out?
Like I said, in the instructional design world, there's the analysis, the design, the development, the implementation, and the evaluation process, which we call ADDIE, ADDIE. It's just an acronym that the Department of Defense actually came up with many, many, many years ago, almost a half a millennium ago. And I'm not joking. And so there's a lot to each one of those phases. And sometimes I'll just come in and help organizations, what is it that you need? Or do you need, as we call it, a needs analysis. What do you need kind of thing? And then, are we going to design it? And that's where I always compare that to being like an architect or creating a blueprint. What kind of blueprint are we going to create based on this analysis that we did? And then are we going to develop it? That's where we bring in all of our graphic artists, our technology people, our people who create those death by PowerPoints. But, if we do a good job, and serious, if we do a good job on the blueprinting side of things, then there is no death by PowerPoint, because we have decided what do people need to know and what do they need to do? There's a place for what do you need to know. If it's knowing things, okay, we're just going to give you some information, but we're going to try to give it to you in a way that's meaningful. But if we need you to do something, if you're sitting there staring at a PowerPoint slide and we're training you to do something, you're totally in the wrong area altogether. But I don't know where we came across this idea that we could sit and have people stare at a PowerPoint slide and walk away and know how to do something differently. If you want people to do it, they have to practice. What kind of practice activities can we give you to help you be able to do your job better? And then from there, how are we going to implement it? What kind of beta tests are we going to run? How are we're going to run some, practice scenarios, those kind of things. And then of course, how are we going to evaluate it? How do we know if the program was successful?
Okay. All right. Well, very interesting. And so you wrote the book. It's entitled The Ambition Quotient, that details how to cultivate ambitious employees in your organization. So, based on that comment about your book, The Ambition The Ambition Quotient, what you're trying to do is help employers create ambitious employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's kind of two sides to what I do. There's we're going to design training, but that training should be something that helps motivate. I guess what I go back to is I when I first started in the corporate world, every time there was a training class, I was like so excited. I was like, oh, I get to go to a training class. This is so cool. I'm going to learn new things. I'm going to do things, because I'm just a compulsive learner. And I thought everybody thought that way. I really did. I thought, and then I got into the instructional design world and I realized that so many people are like, "Ew, I have to go to that training class. Ugh, I got so much work to do. Do I really have to do this? How am I going to get out of doing this?" And I was like, what's wrong with you people? This is crazy, And then I realized, well, they're going to these death by PowerPoint trainings. So if we want to motivate people and inspire them, to me, one of the key elements of that is training, and it's education and making sure that people know how to not only do their job, but they know how they, up the next rung of the ladder. If I want to get to the next rung, what do I need to know? How do I do that so that I can do that? And so that people are excited and engaged when they come to learning, to these learning experiences. So we want that blueprint part of it really needs to dig down deep and find out what it is that's going to motivate people to want to engage in the learning experience, as well as, carry through after that to their job.
Okay. All right. Well, I really appreciate you being on my podcast today, Cheryl. It's been fun talking with you.
Yes.
And and so I would say for those that are listening on a podcast, do me a favor, subscribe to the podcast. And for those that are watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit the like button, because that tells YouTube there's something of value here. Go ahead and hit the subscribe and the notify button. That way you'll get notified the next time we have a podcast. And that's every week. We'll see you then.
Thank you.